inhabited that area, and Arapaho.
There was an E at the end of Arapaho.
What's that?
I thought there was an E at the end.
You thought there was a what?
E at the end of Arapaho.
Not today. Okay? Like the E at the end of potato, canned quail. Anyway, you have to be a little older to understand that, right, Mrs. Montoya?
That's right.
I'll tell you that story if I have time for it. Sioux, Arapaho, and Cheyenne all inhabited that area and were not happy with any construction of any fort. Now, Colonel Carrington had a philosophy during the building of this fort, and his philosophy was that of a defensive nature. He believed his orders were to protect the Bozeman Trail, not engage hostile Indians. If they engaged him, he would certainly take them on. But he wasn't going to go out on the offensive and clear out any Indians, right? So as they build this fort, his philosophy is we'll build it. If they come at us, we'll engage them. But we're not going to go out and engage them prior. Okay? All right, perfect. Well, let's tell you about the construction of Fort Phil Kearny. Kind of interesting how they build this fort from scratch. Say a little bit about Fort Phil Kearny. Well, the site's chosen. Now we got to get everybody there, right? So in late June of 1866, both soldiers and civilians who are working for the military arrive at this location and they prepare to construct Fort Phil Kearny. Late June 1866, the U.S. Army 18th Regiment arrives. Civilians who have made the decision to work for the military are there, and they have arrived and they're starting to prepare to build this fort. Now, when the group arrived, they came in 120 wagons. They had lots of supplies and building materials and had 6 mules pulling each wagon. So they had a lot of mules, a lot of wagons, a lot of equipment. Yep.
6 or 16?
6 mules pulling each wagon and 120 wagons. Each wagon, yeah. So the group brought with them 120 wagons filled with supplies and building materials being pulled by 6 mules each. Now, when everybody got there, the total population was going to be about 600 people. You're going to have about 450 soldiers there, and you're going to have about 150 civilians, which would include any wives or children. Okay, not a lot, but they would be part of the civilian bunch. So the total population of Fort Phil Kearny would eventually swell to 600 people, and the breakdown was 450 soldiers and 150 civilians. Now, just so you know in answering your other question, officers were allowed to bring their wives and children. So of those civilians, 11 were women and 18 were children. The rest were those that were there to work and help build the fort. So the population of Fort Phil Kearny would be 600 people, 450 soldiers, 150 civilians. Officers were allowed to bring their wives and children, and as a result of that, there were 11 women at Fort Phil Kearny and 18 children. Now, this was kind of interesting. Of the 450 soldiers, 80% were considered green recruits. What's that mean, Dylan, if you're a green recruit? You buy a banana, it's green, and what's it tell you? Not ready yet, right? It's got to be yellow. So it's a green recruit. And very inexperienced, just joined the army type. And where'd these guys come from? Where'd these green recruits come from? South, the Civil War, and then immigrants. A lot of these guys were immigrants that came over from Europe and didn't have anywhere to go. So what'd they do? Join the military. So a lot of these green recruits, about 80% of those 450 soldiers, were from the South, or they were foreigners who came into the United States after the Civil War, nothing going, joined the military. Well, the actual construction of Fort Phil Kearny began on, listen, look at this date, Friday, July 13th, 1866. Probably an omen, right? Friday, July 13th, 1866. What, you guys figured this out back there? Are you talking history, Donovan?
We are talking.
That's what I thought, yeah, you look like you might be. Okay, helping him out?
Yeah.
Good boy. So the construction of Fort Phil Kearny began on Friday, July 13th, 1866, kind of an omen. Now, what did the male civilians do? They had two jobs. They would either serve as wood cutters or they would farm the hay in the nearby fields, because what they use that hay for? The livestock, okay? Now, what's a woodcutter? You got to remember they're going to build this fort out of what? Logs. And so they got to go cut the trees down in that area and haul them in and put them together and make the fort. So if you were a male citizen, you would serve as either a woodcutter or you would serve as labor to farm the hay in the nearby fields. Now, this is really the last thing we'll talk about here today, is what was a soldier's duty? They could be assigned daily one of 4 jobs. These are the 4 jobs that they could be assigned. And they weren't assigned the same one every day, but they might go a week on this one and 2 days on that. But these were the 4 jobs you could be given if you were a soldier at Fort Phil Kearny. First of all, you could be assigned to dig trenches. And these trenches were 3 feet deep by 3 feet wide by 9 feet long. That was your job for the day. Andrew, your job today is to dig a trench. Make sure it's 3 feet deep by 3 feet wide by 9 feet long. What were they doing with the trenches?
Making a moat.
No, they're digging the trenches to put the logs in. Okay, to build the fort. So that's one job you could have. Your daily job is to dig a trench 3 feet deep by 3 feet wide by 9 feet long. That was your job for the day.
They only went 3 feet deep.
No, many logs. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, this one. Yeah.
Especially with bigger logs.
Okay, if you didn't get that job, you could have got this job. You were assigned the task of placing the logs in the ditch or the trench. So you either were digging it or you were putting logs in it. Tamping them down, didn't have cement in those days, right? So these things had to be tamped down with dirt, rocks, etc. So you could either dig trenches or put the logs in place. The third job is you were assigned to protect the civilian woodcutters who were under constant harassment from the Indians that didn't want them there. So they're off cutting these trees down and bringing them by wagon back to the trenches. And so another job you could have would be to protect these civilian woodcutters who were cutting these trees down from Indian attack and harassment. And the fourth job you could get would be lookout duty. Lookout duty. Outside the fort, there was a lookout spot on a ridge. And I've been on top of it. And you can get up on that ridge and you can see forever 360 degrees. So if you were given the job of lookout duty, your job was to keep an eye on either friendlies or hostiles that were approaching the construction site of the fort. That was your job. That lookout spot is referred to at Fort Phil Kearny as Pilot's Knob. That's what they call it, Pilot's Knob. And it's pretty cool. I've been on top of it, and you can see forever. Okay? So again, just rehashing this before we quit. Daily, you would be assigned one of the 4 job descriptions during the construction. 1, you would be assigned to dig a trench 3 feet deep by 3 feet wide by 9 feet long, or you'd be assigned the task of putting the logs in the trenches to establish the fort, or you were assigned to protect the woodcutters who were under constant attack from Indian hostiles or you were assigned lookout duty, keeping an eye on the friendlies or hostiles that were approaching the construction site. Which of those jobs used the least amount of men? Obviously the lookout. The rest of them was pretty good. Okay? All right, what we're going to do tomorrow is talk about the characteristics of Fort Phil Kearny, when it was completed, how long it took, and what it took to get it done, and what it looked like when it was finished.
You told us about Pilot's Knob already.
Pilot's Knob is the top, is the knob everybody uses.
Didn't you tell us about something that you went up and saw, or you got some kind of writing about it?
No, that'll be during the federal.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, that's late, that's down the line.
Okay.
Yes.